We have in the studio Dr. Richard Stanwyck, Chief Medical Health Officer of Island Health. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
We have read the stories. We hear it on the news. We have a crisis.
Very much so, and certainly on Vancouver Island, the latest numbers suggest that among the health authorities, we've seen the largest increase in overdose deaths of all of the health authorities. It's 159% of what was the previous year. And the rest of the health authorities, I wouldn't say are enjoying an 80% increase, but clearly it speaks to how significant a problem this is for Island Health.
It's, many people don't think it affects them, but it does, doesn't it?
Yes. In terms of the impact, one from, and I like to sort of back it up. If you look at if people need an ambulance, the idea our ambulance people are just being terribly stressed. They're responding to calls in basically record numbers. So the deaths don't reflect the amount of activity. In fact, it even goes further back with some of our community providers, and in particular speaking to an individual at our consultation we did around a potential supervised consumption site, where this young woman said she signed up to do social work activities, and in the course of 11 months had did 120 resuscitations, which is more than most medical trainees will do in their 4 years of medical school. Our ambulance people are seeing people not once, twice, sometimes 3 times in the single day. Our emergency room staff are describing giving 6 doses of the naloxone to bring people back. And people are basically occupying not only our emergency room beds, our hospital beds, but also our intensive care beds. And at all costs, whether it's the $1,500 a day for the ICU beds, the emergency room visits, or the significant amount of time that, and certainly money that's coming out of our ambulance services, but it's also the human cost. I know at least one example. Today I was speaking to this temporary overdose prevention site where they've already had one person go on post-traumatic stress leave.
Yeah, for the people dealing with it.
For the people dealing with it. This is not the norm. This is so unusual. When you look at Victoria, in 2015 we had 18 deaths, which we thought was pretty bad compared to decade before when we actually looked at a supervised consumption site. A rough calculation, and we'll know, the coroner will confirm this, we're looking at 66 deaths for Victoria alone for 2016.
Already?
Already. For the year of 2016. That's 4 times what we would have expected. And that's in spite of us basically creating an overdose prevention site, us putting additional money into our street outreach. We're struggling.
Tell me a little bit about, because let's face it, drug use has completely changed.
Very much so.
We're talking about kind of 2 issues, or if I can call them issues. One is the people that got hooked on opioids in hospitals and chronic diseases. And then and I hate to use the word recreational user, because I don't think you should use drugs recreational, but we have 2 kind of streams, right?
Yeah, so very much so. There are the individuals who think that this is part of the graduation, and certainly there's evidence even collected locally by University of Victoria researchers where as young as age 13 individuals are big into marijuana, and that tends to be the group. And you have to wonder, why are they using the marijuana rather than the fact that they're experimenting with marijuana. And you find by basically their late teens, they're into the club scene and they're using those heavier drugs. While the bulk of the student population really doesn't start experimenting with marijuana until around 15, 16. So clearly there's something different about that group that starts earlier and graduates to those harder recreational drugs, along with the individuals who get exposed to the opioids because they need it for some reason. I would almost argue, though, there's a third group, and that is the individuals that are trying to cope with a pain that isn't physical, like a back injury, but maybe they were sexually abused as a child, they were bullied, that they're transgendered, and they find that this actually relieves the pain. Or even, certainly cases of people who have sustained severe concussions, and even though they've not received the opiates for the treatment of the head injury, this is how they cope about not being like they used to be.
It has become a challenge for many people, because it's probably tougher in the world that we are today growing up, jobs and etc. I know when we grew up, we had jobs, we had, we never had to worry about it. There's way more worries these days too, right? Because, sorry?
No, you were saying exactly that, parents say their kids are more stressed than they are. And you know what? That's borne out by scientific research. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, because when we did the documentary, we were dealing with crystal meth, 2015. In the way we put the production together and talking to the RCMP, fentanyl came up. This was the new drug. Every month we seem to have another one. Tell me a little bit about fentanyl and now carfentanil. What are they? Well,
fentanyl is an opioid. It's in the family. But if you think about morphine, which most people are familiar with, it was very well used in World War II as a painkiller and certainly in hospitals subsequently. Fentanyl was then developed as a superior and more powerful and potent drug, which is very useful in management, particularly around anesthesia. And so it was really never intended to be used in a broad fashion, though in fairness for people, there are seniors with osteoporosis that are using fentanyl patches quite successfully because of, the characteristics. But what we found was that it not only got into the mainstream as a potent alternative to morphine, as you point out, it kept changing. That we saw the W18 form, which was basically more potent, and then of course the carfentanil, which, believe it or not, is actually used in veterinary science to anesthetize elephants. And here we are seeing a drug which 1 grain gives you a high and 2 grains will kill you on our streets. And the chemists that are making this, they're staying one step ahead of the drug testing, because it seems every couple of months they make a little change in the molecule and our testing procedures don't identify it. So we have seen people just absolutely crashing, and our drug tests have not come back yet, or they come back negative. And the likelihood is that we just haven't got the most recent version of testing to catch the latest version of fentanyl. It's almost like a cat and mouse game with these chemists.
Who makes this?
Well,
where does
certainly,
it come from?
People have said all over the, certainly there's different forms of fentanyl, and because it comes in, such small amounts and can be mixed to generate an enormous profit, there's definitely places on the internet where people can go. There's definitely been Eastern European sources, but the latest has certainly been, in terms of treaties, looking to China as a number of labs having the capacity not only to produce this in volume, but to be able to make those subtle changes to keep avoiding drug testing. So I think that's one of the reasons, and we'll certainly hear from our colleagues in law enforcement about some sort of treaty that we need to have with the Chinese to at least try to control some of the inflow of that substance.
It's incredible. I'd like to show you a stat of the motor vehicle incident death. After introduction of good legislation about drunk driving, more speed traps and etc., you see that the numbers go down. What do you think we need for legislation on this problem?
You pose a really good question. I mean, one of the first things that we're looking at, and certainly has been demonstrated by Vancouver with their insight, is the creation of supervised consumption sites to normalize this activity to a point where the majority of users will in fact use sites. And the advantage, and so far, and I can report this, that there has been no deaths associated with either our supervised consumption sites or with basically these overdose prevention sites that we've created. So we know this will work, but I think we have to look beyond that if we're going to get the reductions in deaths that we're certainly observing in motor vehicles, and that is looking at what other countries are doing. And this goes back to a total attitudinal shift away from this as being a law enforcement issue to that this is a chronic relapsing disease that needs to be treated medically. And just as we provide medications for people with other chronic diseases like heart disease or diabetes, if we get rid of the stigma and the misconceptions about this being a choice, we can do things like Portugal, where the drugs are basically seen as part of the normal regime of management. I personally witnessed in Switzerland the dispensing of medical grade heroin, and these people were able to function. It was done under the care of a psychiatrist, and it totally changed the face of what was happening. And they're certainly not seeing the uptake of carfentanil in those areas, because this is being managed as a chronic relapsing disease for whom some people there will never be a cure.
Yeah, because it's great that you mentioned Portugal, and we will actually print the site where people can watch the TED Talks. It's a TED Talk for people that don't know it. It's a TED Talk about what Portugal has done. They more or less have made it completely legal for all the drugs. The statistics says that drug use went up right away after they introduced it, but it's now down to 50%. Do you think our governments will try that?
Well, honestly, we've already tried it on an experimental basis in Vancouver. The Naomi and Salome trials were very successful in demonstrating that we could, in fact, use basically pharmaceutical products that weren't necessarily heroin, which is very expensive, but in fact other products that we use in mainstream medicine as a good substitution. And they had very good results with these individuals. And certainly in speaking to street-involved individuals, you know, their answer is, if they could get their head away from just thinking about how they're going to secure their next fix, they're going to be more likely thinking about how they can basically start turning their lives around. So in many respects, by taking that motivation to be in terms of the drug-seeking behaviors and shifting it to something else, as well as I think the community benefit of individuals not having to resort to all sorts of behaviors, you know, some criminal, some not, to maintain that supply of, and in some cases just avoiding the dope sickness, we might be able to be in a better position of seeing what happens. And I'll just give you one example of how some simple changes will make a difference. As soon as we got the social housing going in the Johnson Street Community Center, the old Central Care Home, within literally a couple of weeks, the physician there witnessed almost 20 people going on substitute therapy. When you stabilize people's lives, they can get their head around getting better.
Yeah. We have 2 rehab centers on Vancouver Island alone. Is that correct?
In terms of the drug rehab?
Yeah.
Yeah.
2?
And we certainly are going to be expanding the number of treatment beds. We have made a commitment, and by March, Island Health will have increased the number of beds. I know the province committed to a certain number. Island Health is certainly going to basically be adding to that number, including additional youth beds. So this is really important. I think the other component to this, which is the bigger challenge, is it's one thing to have the detox and the short-term rehab, but many of these individuals are going to need long-term therapy, and that's why we've got to keep thinking about this as a long-term relapsing disease. People take 11 tries to quit smoking. Why would we think it's easier with something like opiates?
Well, we have Kellen, later on in the show. He's the brother of Jonas, overdosed 4 times. He's in a rehab center now. We visited the rehab center, and it's incredible. But he was also saying that there is a lot of rehab centers, and let me be honest about this. The owner of the rehab center, let's say, said there's a lot of rehab centers who don't do a good job. So is it Island Health or BC Health that should look after that? Well,
I think this is one of those issues that entire communities required to ensure that, just like with any other disease process, that it's a collective effort. And truly, if we are seeing substandard care, then that really is a major concern, because that would be an impediment to success. And of course, given the stigma already associated with this condition, the last thing we need is inappropriate or inadequate care. So clearly these things should and could be investigated. I mean, a lot of them are not licensed, and so this in part could contribute to the picture.
How come some of them are not licensed? So is it then just companies that start this?
You can, and certainly it's not as big an issue on the island, but certainly in places like Surrey, there's many facilities that have set up for that purpose that don't have the same oversight that other facilities enjoy, and in fact seek out, because then they can actually speak to the fact that they are meeting minimum health and safety requirements.
We're trying to get this documentary in the schools. We have shown it actually to a group of teachers. We asked them what kind of age group, and they said everybody after 11, 12 years old should see this. And what we like to do is, and we're in discussion at this moment, what we like to do is let them show the production. It's only 20 minutes in a kind of a curriculum, and then have a discussion with the students. Is Island Health already doing things to educate people?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that the province has done was a survey of gaps. And one of them that was identified was educational need. And certainly there's now a commitment to work with the Ministry of Education to see how that gap can be addressed. You know, there's certainly programs put together by CAR-BC and other organizations. The question is, are they being implemented? Are they resonating with the population? Are we doing enough? And certainly part of it is, it should be evidence-driven that we may need to have universal programs where all individuals get exposed to good decision-making. But, you know, already, you know, whether it's teachers or researchers, by 12, 13, they can identify the individuals who are already using marijuana, which is the most readily available drug these days. In fact, in some high schools, more individuals have experimented with marijuana than tobacco.
You agree that it's going to be
It's going to
legal?
and I think it probably will. So at some point, we're going to have to address this particular issue. But you know, I think part of this has to go for, okay, we want that general awareness, but what about that population that's already showing those signs, those early signs of where we need to intervene? And so part of that is working with the education system. You know, part of it may be like we're experimenting by putting in actually health clinics in our senior high schools, in basically, you know, in the school district 63, where we've got basically clinics. Where we have public health nurses and occasionally GPs. So, you know, might be that we can make more ready access earlier on in terms of the intervention. But, you know, all in all, the amount of mental health need is certainly outstrips what we're able to provide at this point in time.
So it's at this moment, it's a battle that you're constantly fighting, more or less, with Island Health.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a challenge because, you know, we've got, you know, in Victoria 66 deaths alone the last year. The focus is on, we've got to stop people dying, but at the same time, we've got to back up and look at what are those things that cause people to need these drugs to deal with their pain, whether it's psychological or physical. It's the child that's born with fetal alcohol syndrome. It's the child that's physically or sexually abused as an infant, has the toxic brain, the shrunken small brain, going right into school where these are the kids that are bullied or they're transgendered, or, you know, there's a whole raft of things.
So it's way more than
what we're doing. So we got to think about the whole picture if we're going to make a difference in reducing the number of individuals who need this, as well as dealing with the ones that are requiring this as part of a chronic relapsing disease.
How many safe injection sites do we have on the island?
We've completed the application for one. We hope to have one up very soon for basically a residential setting, which is closed. That's the one run by Portland Hotel. We certainly are looking at having another one in the Rock Bay Landing area, and the plans are underway for moving forward on an Nanaimo application, and then looking at what other models might fit for the rest of the island, because, you know, you can't have, you know, a cookie cutter approach, somehow take insight and think that's the ideal model. We have to work with communities.
And I think politicians have to also understand, maybe get a better understanding what's happening. I see, you wrote an article in the Times Colonist, and I see the reactions of people, and, you know, we should do this and we should do this and we should just forget about them because they want to kill themselves. It's the understanding, because there was a reaction from the Alberta government to ban the machines that makes these pills. Now, I don't know much about, you know, making these pills, but is that really the solution? Or part of the solution?
You know, I think we are at a point where we're going to try anything that might mitigate this. The issue is that what this does is facilitate, you know, perhaps the introduction of fentanyl on the streets, and the fact that these machines, which, you know, one would have never thought would have been used for, you know, such a purpose. You know, we get caught out from time to time. I can't think of, you know, there may be, in fact, and you can just imagine there are probably supplement makers who are just rolling their eyes and saying, I'm making great, you know, product that, you know, in their minds is healthy for people. It's absolutely harmless at worst, and at best it's improving people's health. Now saying, oh my gosh, I'm being impacted by this desperate move. And so I think we're going to have to, we know that for every, you know, intended consequence, there's an unintended consequence. The difficulty is, you know, we are in a state of emergency declared by our Minister of Health, and we are basically exploring all options, putting ones that we know have worked in the past, but we need to look at that broader picture and use this as an opportunity to look at addiction as a disease, not as a law and order issue. And
probably get it to young people who start experimenting that 2 grains, like literally like grains of salt, right?
Yeah.
2 grains can kill you.
Yeah. And this is the piece, and I mean, we hear from university students, well, I've known my drug dealer for years, or I'm not buying it downtown, or, and this is the piece where, while these sites, which we're going to be putting up, will be addressing the group that seems to be at the greatest risk, it certainly, there's those messages that need to reach individuals in our community, because we've certainly seen deaths in our suburbs, and these are not people who would have likely come downtown to use a supervised consumption site.
That's right.
So we do need to have other strategies.
Terrific. Dr. Stanwyck, thank you so much for being in the studio and talk about it, and let's see what's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here are some statistics of overdose deaths in 2016. BC had 914 overdose deaths. 155 total island health overdose deaths.
My next guests are Corporal Scott Helderly from the RCMP and Jonas Archer from Vancouver, who is Jonas's brother. And you are in a rehab center in Surrey at this moment?
It's a recovery society.
Recovery Society, sorry. Scott, we start with you. We have just seen the numbers from 2016.
Well, the numbers of people that have died, right? But, I always wonder when we talk about these things, why does death need to be the measuring stick? What about, because there are countless others that are impacted by it before you even get to death. And don't get me wrong, those are tragic deaths, and my heart goes out to those families. But there are countless other families that are dealing with these issues beforehand, and people that have damaged themselves beyond repair, and then their family members too that are left to try to struggle with, why is it happening? What can we do? How did this happen? What do we do now? And all those questions. So. I know death is easily measured, and that's why we do it, but there's so much beyond that we have to consider.
Yeah, there is, of course, a whole slew of people who never are in these stats, and you do totally write it down. Tell first a little bit about your work at the RCMP with the drugs.
Yeah, I'm with the Strategic Prevention Services, which essentially what we do is we're more upstream than police work is by and large reactionary, and we react to problems that have already taken place. But in my line of work, in my unit, we go further upstream, and we try to put mechanisms in place that will help everybody, so that the instances of these addictions and everything terrible that befalls the families and friends and everybody involved decreases a lot. That's essentially what we do. Right.
I'm 68 years old. The drug world has completely changed since I grew up in the 60s.
Me too. When I was a kid, the marijuana that was around is very different than the marijuana that's out there today, and it wasn't just that. I mean, every new week, seemingly, there's a new drug popping up. When I was a kid, it was marijuana, it was acid, it was cocaine, and there wasn't really an awful lot else that we were focused upon. Nowadays, just in the last decade or so, okay, well, it was heroin and then morphine and then meth. Everybody was worried about meth and got excited about that. And then it was bath salts for a little while and a variety of other things. And now it's fentanyl and then carfentanil and W18 and who knows what drugs are waiting to be invented this year in 2017. And maybe a year from now, we're focused on something entirely different, but we're saying, oh, this is terrible. But if you back up before all of it, you start to think, okay, maybe we ought to look at the root causes why people choose to do these drugs. What is it? What's happening in their lives, and what can we do to impact them, to inspire them to know that they're better than that?
Yeah. That brings me to Kellen. You heard the story, of course, from Jonas. Like you guys were together when this happened.
Yeah.
In the production, he tells it was crystal meth, but it was not crystal meth, right?
There was GHB, a lot of GHB use that was...
Tell me what it is, because I don't think most people know what GHB is.
Well, there's many common misconceptions as to what it is. There's a lot of people think it's the date rape drug. It's been labeled a date rape drug, but my experience with it was much different from that. I used it for bodybuilding. It has a natural steroid in it, and my brother and I were making it, and it's a very dangerous drug to make. It's very harmful to the body. to the lungs, and I guess my brother wasn't using proper protection when he was making it, so we think that that might have contributed to his stroke.
Nobody, I think, well, there's probably many people that don't understand, because when you started with recreational drugs, and you know, I let Scott talk about it in a moment, did you ever think that it would lead to where you are now?
No. When I was 12 years old, I think I smoked my first joint, and I had experimented with alcohol a few times up until that point. I never had any idea that this is what was going to end up happening to myself and to my family. I knew that there was something different about me when I was a young child. There was an emptiness inside me, something that I was always looking outside of myself for gratification or some sense of comfort. I always had this. It was the only way to describe it as an emptiness inside. And when I took drugs like alcohol and marijuana, it went away. And so whenever I needed to cope with something, a stressful situation, or just when I was bored, I would turn to that. That went from a weekend thing into a daily thing quite quickly for me. I think that there was underlying issue of addiction in me from a child. It wasn't something that I gained from experience or from using regularly. I think that I was predisposed.
Do you see this, Scott, in your, with the work that you do for the RCMP? Is this a typical story?
Well, we were talking earlier, and he's raised in West Vancouver. He said he came from a good home, which kind of flies in the face of the theory that the most at-risk ones are those who have been bullied, those who have been sexually abused, those who are transgendered, and those things. I'm personally of the belief that who's not at risk? Everybody's at risk, and it could happen to anybody. You can't tell by looking at somebody whether they have a genetic predisposition. You don't know until you go down that road, right? So my scope is to inspire everybody to try to never go down that road, so that they never find out, so that they're never impacted that way, and not just those who you might look at and say, oh, they're at risk, but for everybody. Because I believe that the issues at hand are connecting kids to their society, to their family, to their schools, to making them feel, Kellen spoke of an emptiness, so that there are things that you can fill that emptiness with without going down that road. I know your story because we did a variety of town hall meetings where you were a part of it. You overdosed 4 times.
I did, yeah.
And my question was, and my question again is that, for our audience, after the first time, didn't you think, this is it?
It's hard to explain what goes through someone's head when number one, when they're addicted to drugs, but also too, the experience of overdosing. Now this might sound strange to someone who's never been through it before, but when you OD on heroin, it's not a violent or a terrible experience. You go under, and it's like you fall asleep. And for the first 3 times, honestly, I don't think I was really even aware that I had OD'd. I was brought back by paramedics, and they said, you took a little bit too much of this substance or whatever, and they brought me back. It was only the 4th time when the paramedics sat with me and said, look, you were on the brink of death. You had no heartbeat when we found you. You were blue. You were dead. And it was only by someone else's intervention that we even gave you a 4th hit of Narcan, which brought you back. So that experience, coupled with I had been in recovery for quite some time when I had a slip or relapse, it really hit home how close I actually came to death. The 3 previous ODs, no one really sat with me and told me this is what just happened to you.
Yeah.
I left the hospital like thinking that I fell asleep or something, and someone found me. And
So you went to the hospital?
Yeah.
3rd time, 4th time? Was it
the first 3 times I was admitted to the hospital, but they didn't. No one really looked after me or told me exactly what had happened. And when the person that ODs, they don't really know what's going on. They come out of a daze, they're not all with it, and they're released from the hospital
And you're
away,
out back on the
back
street.
on the street, and away you go. It was the 4th time that really hit home, because the paramedics said, "Look, we found you dead. Like, you were not, you had no heartbeat, you had no pulse, and you came extremely close to dying." And that's when it finally hit home for me that, like, wow, like that's.
Dr. Stenwick, that we had earlier in the program, he did an article for the Times Colonist. And I went on the website and I said, and I see quotes on there. I have no sympathy for these people. If they like to kill themselves, let them. What would you say to those people?
Well, I can say, number one, I feel sorry for those people, that's their take on it, because that person could be one of their family members. It could be their son, their daughter, their husband, their wife. And only until it happens to someone close to them will they realize, what addiction is, because they'll have to live it.
Yeah.
And, I can only feel sorry for a person that has an opinion like that, because it's ignorant.
Scott?
I agree. You think if you were to probably sit those people down, I'm sure they didn't mean it to sound as cold and blunt as that, because how could anybody really think that way? This is a human life we're talking about, and given an opportunity, like Kellen, look, still battling it daily, but from here on, still a young man. You think about fast forward 10, 20, 30 years from now, maybe he's married, maybe he's got kids. Through his experience and inspiring others, think of the difference he can make in the world. So to zoom back to when he was lying unconscious, to say, okay, I don't care. Yeah. It's really cold. It's very
we will get back to your rehab, to talk a little bit about it later on. We talked a little bit with Dr. Stenwick about it. Safe injection size. Tell me something about it.
I can tell you that term really doesn't sit well with me, because when you really get down to it, what is safe about injecting these substances into the human body? A supervised injection, okay, but safe injection, that's sort of, when you promote the idea that something is safe, people will think, okay, it's not that big a deal, done under the right circumstances. I would argue that there are no circumstances that should be acceptable that we settle for that. If somebody absolutely needs that service because they're at the end of the line, so to speak, then absolutely, and I hope it does them a world of good. But I don't think that's where our focus ought to be. The way I look at the whole issue is, I sort of imagine that there's a raging river, and in this river there's jagged rocks and very strong currents that could sweep you away, but the start of it is kind of mild, and people are hopping into this river thinking, I'm just in here for a little bit just to sort of have a little bit of fun, and nobody envisions, and I think Kellen already mentioned that he didn't envision the first time he used that he would get swept away. Nobody envisions that they're going to get swept down the river and hit the jagged rocks and get swept away by the current. What we've done a little bit in society is we've taken an awful lot of resources, we've put them at the edge of this waterfall, and then there's a violent drop down to the bottom of the waterfall, and we've put a bunch more resources down there, and we said, okay, don't worry, if you survive the fall, we're going to get you back out. Well, it's absolutely meaningless unless we put some mechanism in place to keep them from going back and hopping into the river again. So wouldn't it be cool if we left some resources there to deal with the people that need that, but to move the bulk of the resources up to the front of the river to inspire people to enjoy all that life has to offer without hopping in that dangerous river?
We have to start inspiring people.
Right. And connecting.
And connecting.
And making people feel valued and important.
Yeah.
And I think the more emphasis we put on investing in that, then the better we're going to be down the road. 10, 20, 30 years. The problem with that is it's not measurable. you can't, I mean, currently you can say, okay, we gave out X number of clean needles, and everybody would say, well, that's great. I would look at that and say, wouldn't it be great if we didn't need X number of clean needles? Wouldn't it be great if we could focus our resources on connecting people, on making them feel valued and important, and going on to give to the world whatever gifts they have inside them to provide, and making an impact that way.
You think that the focus should be in that direction?
Absolutely,
Like
absolutely. And don't get me wrong, for the people that are already down at the end of the river, we need to help them. But I fear that maybe because it's easier to measure that's where we focus maybe too many of our efforts, because we can measure it, because we can say, look what we're doing, we've done this, and we can put something to a monetary figure. Whereas the investment upriver, you can say intuitively, I know we're doing great things because we all feel good and we feel included, but you can't measure it. You can't say because of your efforts, these people went on to lead productive, great lives.
Because that brings me to you, is how you deal with it at this moment.
With my addiction?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's certain things that I have to do on a daily basis to maintain my recovery. It's my life isn't focused around not doing drugs anymore. I'm at the 6-month marker. I've got 6 months sober right now, and now it's more, how do I live life? How do I deal with stress? How do I deal with letdowns or joy, happiness, sadness? These are things that I have no experience with, because my whole life was geared around numbing out and not partaking in society and life and being a part of. My whole life was centered around doing drugs. So I'm taking the steps very slowly. I'm not rushing anything. I've done this enough times I've tried enough times to get sober, and so I know what not to do, and definitely taking my time and taking it slow and being in a supportive environment are the key things for me right now.
And you get the help that you need at this moment?
Oh, definitely.
Also, friends. Jonas says in the production, I have said no to an amount of friends or so-called friends that he had, and he has literally said no more dealing with them. I'm having a new set of friends. Is same thing?
Same thing. When my brother had a stroke, I had to make a choice, and that was family or friends, and it was one or the other, because I needed to put my efforts into not only helping him in his recovery, but sorting my life out and supporting my mom, helping support her, and we needed to stick together in that situation. So I said no.
On the right track.
I said no to my friends. I had to cut them off, because really, when I'm sober and I'm walking the straight and narrow, what do I have in common with them? Nothing. I have several friends that from my past and my addiction that I do associate with, because they're clean now. But that's their choice. If they wanna join me on the other side, they're more than welcome to. Right? It's a much better life.
And Scott, you feel the same way, that this is where the RCMP is putting their resources in, right?
In terms of helping to promote, the things that would, I guess, amount to success. Like Kellen said, when he was using, he was sort of depriving himself of some of the life skills that I think there's a lot of value in promoting, like overcoming adversity and building resiliency skills and coping mechanisms with stress, you mentioned, and things like that. And you think about how valuable those things are to everybody, and I can't imagine what it would be like, and any of us, if we sat and put ourselves in his shoes for a second and thought, what would my life be like if I had to come to a crossroad where I had to tell all my friends we can't be friends anymore. So to come to that, I think it would take an awful lot of character, an awful lot of courage, and I think you're to be applauded for making that very hard decision.
Absolutely. It's tell a little bit about the DARE program. I sat in one of the programs at one of the schools. Tell a little bit about the DARE program.
It's one of the things that we do in the RCMP that promotes a lot of developmental assets in youth. It promotes resiliency. It helps build decision-making skills, and a lot of the things that we just spoke about. That if people lack those, then they may fall prey to making bad decisions. But so it's taught in the grade 5 level. There's also a middle school component too, and it happens over the course of 10 weeks. And the great thing about it is it helps to build those connections that we were talking about are so valuable between not just the police but the school, the families, and the DARE officer, and we really become a part of the kids' lives, and we understand what they're going through, and help to provide them with a little bit of an adult role model. Quite honestly, it's great for me too, because I've grown so much as a person, not just as a police officer or a DARE officer, but as a person too, by my interaction with them.
Because it's not only about drugs; it's about bullying. It's about
very little is about drugs. If we're being honest, it's about building life skills that'll pay dividends down the road. But and here's kind of the rub. It can't be just a one and done. We used to just focus on promoting DARE, and people would say, okay, my child had DARE in grade 5, but now here they are in grade 12, and they're smoking marijuana, or they're drinking heavily, or whatever, so DARE clearly was a waste of time, didn't work. Well, you can't really look at it that way, any more than you could say, okay, I gave a boy 10 math classes in grade 5, and then he gets nothing else until he's in grade 12, and then you lay a math test on him. How well is he going to do with nothing in there? So you have to have support below and above it. So we've developed a sort of a continuum. We call it the community prevention education continuum, where we try to build as many asset development initiatives from kindergarten right through to grade 12, with DARE sort of as the cornerstone. And I think the more emphasis we can all do on helping to build healthy youth, then the necessity to deal reactively with instances that would arise had we not done that is going to go way down.
It's Kellen, in the break we were talking about fentanyl. You have studied it. How come that people die from these pills, right? Because you was in this world, right?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely more to it than the point that I made. But when you look at fentanyl on a molecular level, it has a binding agent in it, and because it's so potent, these chemists who don't really have a lot of experience with they're not like a pharmaceutical professional. They're making it in labs a lot of the times, which are local. Which I've heard in Vancouver, there were several that were busted less than 3 months ago, and they're making this. So they're not professional chemists. They're drug dealers or people that get the recipe or whatever. So they make it, and when they make it, at a molecular level, it has a binding agent in it. And so when you put it in a bag full of other powder and you leave it in there, or you shake it around, when one molecule of fentanyl touches another molecule, it binds to it. So you have lethal doses and non-lethal doses. So it just, at a molecular level, it's dangerous.
6 grains can kill you.
I think Dr. Stanwyck said 2 can kill you.
2 can kill you.
2.
This is what people have
and
to
those
understand.
grains are so teeny tiny. I mean, and like you said,
that's also too. That's fentanyl, and cardofentanyl is even more potent than that.
Yeah.
So
And like you said, they're not held to any clinical trials. They're not held to any standards or whatever. They're thrown together in somebody's basement or kitchen or whatever, and then released for public consumption.
Is it difficult for the RCMP to deal with this?
Well, it is, because everything keeps changing. We're always, like I said, not that long ago it was bath salts and meth, and now it's fentanyl, carfentanil, and then W18, and who knows what's waiting to be invented next week. So I think we've invested an awful lot of time and energy in chasing the drug, when really we ought to be further upstream and focusing on the root causes. But there's always in society, we always seem to be looking for excuses for people to use. People are always coming up to me and they're asking me, for whatever reason, what advice do you have to today's youth so that they can partake in these substances but without dying? And if you can imagine the wheels turning in my head at that, when I'm getting asked those questions, and I look at Kellen and his family, and I would think, why would you ever want to flirt with that?
Yeah.
I'm sure you would say the same thing.
Totally.
And to you mentioned recreational thing. We're not talking about a volleyball here. We're not talking about something that's meant to do for physical enjoyment. We're talking about escapes. We're talking about things that can potentially have very, very terrible results. Why run the risk?
We're almost to the end of this segment. I give you both a chance to, Kellen, direct yourself to the audience. What is your message?
I mean, the famous saying, "Don't do drugs," right? That's the first thing that comes to my mind. But there's just so much more to it than that. It's hard to put into words. I guess what I could say to the kids is to know that you're worth it, to know that people care about you, and that you're not alone, and that you don't have to battle with addiction or with struggling with using alone. There's people out there that care, and there's people that will help you if you reach out for help.
I agree 100%. Once upon a time, they tried to make it that simplistic, like don't use, just say no, right? Don't use drugs, just say no. And they meant well, but that's way easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
And so instead of focusing on the, well, why wouldn't we do that? Why don't we focus on why should you invest in today's youth? Why should you be important in the life of a child? Why should you inspire? And the answers to that are imagine the society we would have if everybody took the opportunity to pick one kid and make a difference in their lives, a positive difference in their life. And it's not that hard to do. So why aren't we doing it? You think of those terms. How much better a society would we be in if we made that investment? How many stories like Kellen's and Jonas's wouldn't have to be told? How many kids who went down the wrong road and succumbed to that would have been able to offer the world the gifts that they had? Think of the great innovators in today's society. What if they had befallen that same fate and we would have been deprived of their gifts? So we got to think a little bit better. Then we have to look with better eyes than what we've been looking.
That's great. Great ending. Thank you for both for being here. When we come back, we're going to talk to the person who started this whole program. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
66 total overdose deaths in Victoria, 75 deaths in South Island, 29 overdose deaths in Nanaimo, 57 overdose deaths in Central Island, and 23 overdose deaths in the North Island.
My next guest is Hilton McAllister. Hilton was actually the person that got me into this project. Hilton, tell a little bit about how this started.
Well, I got to go back about 2.5 years, and I picked up the phone, and it was Carol, who's Jonas' mom. And I hadn't seen, or I hadn't talked to her for a couple or 3 years, and I hadn't seen Jonas for about 5. And she said, I got some bad news for you. She said, Jonas has suffered from a heart attack and then a stroke, and he's in a wheelchair and he's in GF Strong. So we chatted for a few more minutes about his condition, and I said, okay, if you're talking to him, tell him I'll come over and see him. So I headed over in the ferry from Nanaimo to Vancouver, and as I walked in his room at GF Strong, he was sitting in a wheelchair, trying as best he could to brush his teeth with his left hand. What's happened to him is that his whole right side is partially paralyzed. He can lift his hand, his right hand, but that's about all he can do. He's got no motion in his legs, so he can't walk. If he wants to push his wheelchair, he's got to push it backwards because only his left hand has got a reasonable amount of feeling and coordination to it. He will never be in a position where he can cut a steak with a knife and fork. He can't tie up his shoes. He needs somebody to bathe him in the morning. And I looked at this fellow who I'd last seen when he was pretty well a little kid, and my heart just broke. And so we were both pretty happy to see each other, and I said to him, so how you doing, Jonas? And I expected a tale of woe, but you know what he said to me? He said, Hilton, I am blessed. Okay, tell me more. He said, I'm blessed because I'm alive, and really he shouldn't have been. He's blessed because his family supports him 100%, and he's also blessed because he's at GF Strong, which has got the best of the best in terms of rehab. So I said, okay, Jonas, I'm going to sit on the bed here. I want you to tell me everything that's happened over the last number of years since I last saw you. And I was there for 2 hours, and I couldn't believe how good this guy's memory is. He talked about events where I was at, and he talked about all the detail. I couldn't even remember the event. So mentally, he's very, very, very astute. So when he finished telling me his story, I went back to Duncan, and I thought about it for a couple of days, and I said to myself, we've got to show this story to the public. We've got to get it out there because this is a really tragic tale, and this can happen to anybody if they get into drugs.
Yeah.
So I phoned him a couple of days later and I said, would you be interested in telling your story? And he said to me, I would love to tell my story. He said, if I could save one life, just one life, it will all be worth it. So I invited him over for a couple of days. Now, he hadn't been out of Vancouver for weeks and weeks because he was basically confined to this wheelchair. So he went on the ferry by himself. I picked him up. He came down. Meanwhile, what I did is I phoned Nick Versteeg. That's you. And Nick you had just completed this Once Upon a Day in Cowichan, which was an absolutely incredibly gifted production. And I said, look, I'm going to go down to Cowichan Bay. Would you be interested in filming Jonas' story? And we did it. We filmed for an hour and a half, and that's all history.
What impressed me the most when we went to GF Strong is when he buttered the sandwich. I think that still, to me, is one thing that I thought, wow, if we can show that to young people, how tough it is, doing a simple task, right? That was an incredible part. What you want to do with the documentary? What is your plans?
Well, once we had the hour and a half done, that wasn't the end of it. We had to film nine other locations. And then we had to put everything in a logical order. We had to take 2.5 hours and condense it down to 22 minutes, right? So once that was completed, if you recollect, what we did is we produced a bunch of DVDs, and we thought it was pretty close to the final copy, but then we distributed them and we got feedback, and as a result of that, we modified the final version. Yeah. Kellen got one copy of that DVD, and he showed it to the 12 guys that were in his recovery house. And after he showed it, like these guys are pretty hard guys. They know everything there is about drugs, everything. They've done it and they've seen it. He showed that video, the 22-minute video, and when it was over, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. So I felt that this added a lot of credence to what we had produced. So to make the video universally make it available. Make it available. Yep. What I did is I contacted a friend of mine, Jillian Lawrence, who lives in Shawniga Lake, and I asked her to put together a website for us, which she did. It's now up on YouTube, and it's operational. We've had about 1,000 hits, which is pretty good. Wow. And 1,000 viewings actually, so that's excellent. Yeah, we will print the name of the website on the screen. People can download the production for free, right? Yep. What else you want to do with it? Well, the other thing we've done is we've linked it into GoFundMe. Now, GoFundMe is an opportunity for us to raise some money to continue this endeavor. We don't need a lot of money. I put in there that we're looking to raise $6,000. We've already raised half of that. We've had about 12 or 13 donors. Some have donated $10. Others have donated $1,000. And we're well on our way to raising the money. What do you like to do with the money? I knew you'd ask me that question. I think that people should know, right? First of all, there's a few invoices that we have to pay. It's not a lot, it's a few $100s. We also need to update our website and make sure it stays current. The third thing that I want to do is I would like to continue our marketing through social media, service organizations, and through community presentations, which we have done a number of already.
Yeah.
Then what I would really like to do, as you mentioned earlier, I want to get this video into the school system. Okay, that really I think is our biggest focus over the next short period. And lastly, I would like us to continue doing projects like we're doing today with Shaw TV.
Yeah.
I'd like to do one thing for Jonas as well. Jonas has what's called ataxia, and this is a lack of coordination in his hands. He basically is on a disability pension, and he makes $560 a month. $400 of that goes to food and staples. $100 goes to his telephone and to his TV, and there's not a lot left. I think his days would be much more productive and much more interesting if he had access to the internet, but he's physically incapable of using a keyboard because of the lack of coordination. So what I would like to do is, if we can raise enough funds, I'd like to spend a little money, buy him a computer, and get him some Dragon software, which basically is a speech recognition software.
Yeah, yeah.
So instead of having to use his hands, he can basically get voice prompts, and that will make the computer
And that comes actually back when we heard the conversations today. That comes back is when we give somebody some tools that they can look for things, they can feel more productive. That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's anything you like to add?
Yeah, there's a couple of people that I think we need to thank.
Go for it.
So I've got them listed here because I didn't want to miss anybody.
No.
First of all, Corporal Dave Cuson and Corporal Scott Hilderly from Victoria and Nanaimo. Passionate, professional. They love doing what they do. Great guys. Dr. Richard Stanwick, Chief Medical Officer. He's a very, very busy fellow, and we need to really thank him for his support. I think that's going to go a long way in achieving our objectives. Jillian Lawrence, our web designer. Talented, generous, amazing lady. Dr. Isabel Rimmer and Dr. Roger, don't know his last name, but they so graciously gave of their time.
Yeah.
Jonas Archer, who's a longtime friend. He's made great progress in his battle with drugs, and he truly loves and supports his brother, which is really admirable. Nick Versteeg, generous, supportive, creative, enthusiastic, and a brilliant mind. You can buy dinner. Jonas Archer, inspirational, never a complaint, patient. I said to him one day, I said, how come you're so patient? He said, I got nothing but time. And a great sense of humor, and I call him my miracle man.
Yeah.
And finally, to all those people that have donated to GoFundMe, and to Tyler and all these great people at Shaw TV here, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it.
Terrific. Hilton, thanks so much. What we hope we did with the conversation today is exactly what the documentary was meant for, a discussion about drug use. And if we can inspire young people to maybe rethink and do things more for the community, get them involved, and etc. You heard it today, I don't have to repeat it. Hilton, thank you very much. Thanks to Shaw. It's been a pleasure doing this program.
May I just add one more? May I just add one more thing? Yeah. Our vision is to make this video available to all students in British Columbia. We can either do it from the bottom up, which means we've got to go to every school board. We need 1,000 people. It ain't going to work. So what we need to do is we need to let the Premier of British Columbia know that we need her support to make this happen, and she can deal through the Ministry of Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. So what I would like everybody that's viewing this video to do is to write to the Premier, send them an email, and put in the subject line, "My Story" by Jonas Archer, and please tell her that we want to get this into the schools. And you can see those email addresses on the bottom of the screen.
Terrific. Thank you, Hilton.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you to Shaw for giving us this time to do this program. Thank you very much.
Here is what's needed to combat this crisis. 600 plus island health staff trained to administer naloxone. 3,320 Naloxone kits distributed to island health frontline workers and people who use drugs. 60 plus sites where kits are available. Island Health Sites and Partners.
Jonas's story, resonates with me. I've seen this over my career. Good young people, coming from good families, coming from good lives, having those sparks, and then a couple bad choices, and down the slope they go, and it saddens me that this has to continue to happen. And really, what's so nice about this video, in my mind, is if we can show kids just another way of looking through life, through the lens, and say, you know what, I don't want to end up that way. And the power of Jonas's story, I think, is very important for young people, because I'm sure he would love to take that clock and turn it back to a time where those choices were present in his life and he could make a different choice.
For a free download of Jonas' My Story, please visit jonasarcher.com or go to our website dvmedia.ca.